70-742, Lesson 12, Managing Certificates. So this is an extension of our Lesson 11, where we first got a deeper understanding of how our certificate services are implemented. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we manage certificate templates, which we've done already, but we're going to take a deeper dive into it. Managing that certificate deployment and validation and revocation, renewal, managing enrollment and renewal using group policies. If you're working in an environment where you're going to use certificates, it's probably a fairly large environment. Let's be honest. And if you've got even 100 users, do you want to have to be responsible for each one of those certificates getting deployed and installed for the users, for the devices? No, we use automatic enrollment, automatic renewal. We do this through group policies. And then we'll also take a look at managing key archival and recovery. So let's get into it. This is all working with digital certificates. And it's basically like having an electronic ID card. It's used to certify the online identity of individuals, organizations, and computers. It has an organization's name, or it has the person's name on it, a serial number, an expiration date, a copy of the certificate holder's public key. That's used for encrypting messages and creating digital signatures. And of course, the digital signature of the CA, the Certification Authority, that assigned the certificate, so that our recipients can verify that this certificate is authentic, that it's real. Now, X509. This is the de facto standard for all digital certificates. And the current version is version 3. And that standard specifies the format for the certificate, for the revocation lists, attribute certificates, and also a path validation algorithm. In that certificate, you're going to find a version number, a serial number, a signature, an algorithm identifier, a hash algorithm, when it's valid from, in other words, when it was issued, and how long is it valid to. The subject name, who does it identify, the person, the entity, or the owner of the certificate. And there'll be subject public key information, and that's the public key in a list of the algorithms. There will also be the certificate authority's digital signature. There are only so many root CA certificates that are assigned to commercial third-party organizations. Understand that when you acquire a digital certificate from a third-party organization, you might use a certificate chain to obtain the root CA certificate so it can be trusted. So let's take a quick look at that. All we have to do is come up here to the little lock that's on the website. We're going to select that, and we can see that our connection is secure, right? It's secured by a digital certificate. Let's go ahead and select the certificate. So here's that same information we were just looking at. So we can see version 3, a serial number, the signature algorithm, the hash algorithm, who issued it, when was it issued, how long is it good to. If we come down and look at the subject, well, this is the subject name for the association, the public key parameters. We can continue down. We can see there's other attributes that are in here, different other fields. There's our CRL, subject alternative names. What's the key usage? If we select certificate path, we can see that there is a hierarchy here. Yes, it's issued to this device, and it's identifying this device, but that was from this, and at the top level, this certificate. So let's take a look at that certificate. Here's that root certificate, and it's the external CA root. So we can see, and it's identified right there as AdTrust External CA Root, and certification path, it's the top level. If you acquire a digital certificate from a third-party organization, that's what this is. This is the certificate chain, so we can see the root CA certificate. So if we need to trust it, we can install that root CA certificate. Let's see if we have this Sectigo AdTrust root certificate already in our list of certificates. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to run an MMC, and I'm going to go add remove certificates for the computer account. Next, and finish, and OK. And now let's go ahead and expand that out, and here's our trusted root certifications, our trusted root CAs. Now, what was the name of that? Sectigo AdTrust. Well, right here's the AdTrust External CA root. It's already there. So we already have it. It's as simple as that. If it did not exist, we could always view the certificate. We could go to details. We could copy the file, and we could import it. But you see, it's already been done for us. Saturday, May 30th. That's 5/30/2020 is when it expires. If you look here, right there's that same expiration date. Already done for us. Okay, moving on. We can see these are all the different other types of certificates that are available to us. Switching back to that MMC, we can take a look at what they're talking about here. I'm going to move this off to the side. Personal. Well, personal, these are certificates that have been issued to the local computer, and currently I don't have any issued. If we were on a domain, I probably would. Trusted root certification authorities, we just saw that. All these different certificates, root CAs that have been issued. Enterprise trust. Let's see if there's anything there. Nothing there. Intermediate. Well, there's intermediates, right? We don't always have the top level. Here's some intermediate, and here's the revocation list for that. What about trusted publishers? Let's see if we have any certificates. Well, SonicWall, my VPN. Anything that's untrusted? Well, not available. Looks like it's expired a long time ago. Trusted third-party root certification authorities. Many. And also we can go in here, we can take a look if there was any Active Directory objects, we might be able to look at those. Certificate enrollment request. They're not things that you're going to see in here. But you can see there are many, many certificates that you already have on your computer and you just don't even realize it. All right, that's enough of that. Okay, moving on. So how do we access a certificate store? Well, we just did that. That's what we were doing. Understand there are 4 basic formats. The PKCS number 12, the PKCS number 7, X509, and then the base 64 encoded X509. So many times we'll use the DER encoded. That's Distinguished Encoding Rules, DER format. That's typically how we're going to export our certificates. So if we go ahead and we follow the steps, and we'll do this in your lab, we can export a digital certificate. If we were to select this lundc1adatum.com and right click on it, we could export that certificate. We would then have a saved version, a saved copy of that digital certificate. We could then, if we wanted to, and would do this in our lab as an exercise, delete that certificate. Say somehow it gets damaged and we remove it from our store. Well, we can navigate to where we saved that digital certificate, double click on it, and import it back into the store. It's just that easy. What do we use certificate templates for? Well, we've seen this. We've done this for setting up our certification authority and our domain controller. They simplify the task of administrating a certificate authority by allowing an administrator to identify, modify, and issue certificates that have been pre-configured for selected tasks. Let's jump over and take a look at where we're at in our domain controller currently. Now, I've already done Lab 12 on ACE IT, but I did not do it here. So everything's not going to be present. So this would be the same as if I had not yet performed Lab 12. So if we go to our certification authority and we expand, we see that certificate templates, you can see I've already done, I did Lab 11 on here to give you all an example of what we would do. I did not do Lab 12 on here. I did Lab 12 because we had that available to us on ACE IT. However, if we manage, we can see that there are many different types of templates that are available to us. And we can specify exactly how they're used. For example, in your lab, you're going to go into Enrollment Agent and we'll create a special enrollment agent template that we can specify exactly who is eligible to enroll certificates for other purposes, for other users. We have our corporate user certificate. We have our datum domain controller, web server. These identify our components. Now, what's the difference between our different versions of certificate templates? Well, you can see here, there's 4 schema versions. A version 1, version 2, version 3, and version 4. Version 1 was the first, and it was introduced with Windows Server 2000. So understand that there are certain attributes that are associated with these. The version 1 supports general certificate needs and provides compatibility with clients and issuing CAs. Version 2 was introduced with Windows Server 2003. And that gave us the ability to configure certificates, to control the way that certificates are requested, issued, and used. That also brought in the concept of auto-enrollment. Version 3 certificates were introduced with Windows Server 2008, and they introduced the ability to support what's called Suite B cryptographic algorithms. This was created by the NSA, the National Security Agency, to specify cryptographic algorithms that have to be used by the US government. This is so we can better secure confidential information. And then finally, version 4 templates were introduced with Server 2012, and they allow administrators to separate what features are supported by various operating system versions by adding a compatibility tab to the certificate template. So they also support what's called the CSP, the cryptographic service providers, and KSP, key storage providers. And finally, they can be configured to require a renewal with the same key. Typically, you're going to have the following tabs: general, compatibility, request handling, and so on. And we'll run through a number of those as we work with our templates in our lab. When we modify permissions for a template, those permissions, as you can see, are full control, read, write, enroll, and auto-enroll. If a principal is not allowed to enroll, they won't be able to obtain that certificate. If they're not allowed to auto-enroll, we won't be able to have it automatically applied to them, perhaps through a group policy. If they don't have read, of course they won't even be able to view the certificate. Different permissions for different purposes. Goes through creating the template, which we've done and we'll do again in our lab. Let's take a look at what they're talking about with managing certificate deployment, validation, and revocation. So we have to do this if we've got any number of certificates that need to be issued. If all you're going to do is create a web server and secure it with a certificate, there's no point in installing a CA. Get that certificate from a certification authority, or if it's for your own internal server, self-sign it. It's not secured by a third party, but it's fine. But if you're going to have an infrastructure that needs many certificates, you need to use auto enrollment. This is the method by which we can automatically deploy certificates to those users and computers that require them. Now, there are a couple different ways. We can do what's called manual enrollment. We can do enrollment on behalf, and that's the concept of having an enrollment agent, which we'll look at. We can do a CA web enrollment, or we can do auto enrollment. They're all web-based. So before we can even use these, we have to configure the website that the role service will be working from. And we do this in our lab. We have to specify the type of authentication, the service accounts, and the use of the digital certificate. We'll go through that in the lab. Now, using manual enrollment. We've done manual enrollment a number of times. If we open up our MMC and do our certificate snap-in, and we right-click and say all tasks request new certificate, this is manual enrollment. We've done this multiple times. That is the manual enrollment process. To use CA web enrollment, we actually access the CertServe website, and this will run through the configuration of in our lab. And you would access it, for example, on our lab environment. We would access that through https://lun-dc1/cert-srv. And this is the interface that you would see, and you could select request a certificate, and in our case we'll do an advanced request, and we will select our corporate user template and then request the certificate. It will be automatically issued. We click on to install it, and it's automatically installed for us, and we're done. If we want to use an enrollment agent, we specify who is the person that is allowed to be an enrollment agent. This is called enrollment on behalf. The user with an enrollment agent rights can then enroll for certificates on behalf of other users. For example, we need to preload certificates on a set of employees' new smart cards. This would allow that person, that enrollment agent, to do that. When we use the restricted enrollment agent, it allows you to limit the permissions for users who are designated as enrollment agents. We'll go through this in the lab. Using auto enrollment is a very powerful feature. It's deployed using group policies. And in the lab, I run through this chain of its computer configuration / policies / Windows. I'm not going to read through that again. You can read that. However, understand auto enrollment can be applied only to enterprise CAs. You can't do that with a standalone CA. And you have to be using Schema Template version 2 or higher. In our case, I believe we'll be using version 3. You have to deploy Schema Template version 2 or higher. And the user needs read, enroll, and auto enroll permissions. There's also a concept of certificate roaming, and this allows user certificates and private keys to be stored within Active Directory. When you use this, their certificates and keys are downloaded when a user logs on, and if desired, the certificate and keys are removed when the user logs off. The advantage of credential roaming is that the certificate and key follow no matter where the user logs on. And this is supported with Windows 7 and newer operating systems. Now, device enrollment service. We're not going to install this in our lab, but understand that device enrollment service, this is used for network devices such as switches and routers that need to have an X509 digital certificate, and you want them to be secured by that certificate from your root CA. So, for example, if we're going to use 802.1x to secure our ports on our switches and access points, or if we need SSH to connect to a switch or router, we can use the network device enrollment service to install the certificates using that. All right. As far as certificate renewal, understand that every certificate is only good for a certain amount of time. It's got a finite life. At the end of that validity period, the certificate's no longer considered accessible and it will have expired. Well, the whole thing is you want to renew that certificate before it expires. If it expires, you probably are going to have to issue a new certificate. So you can renew certificates much in the same way as you request certificates. You can use the certificates console to renew a certificate, or you configure the group policy object, and this is the sweet thing about using group policies. You can configure that GPO that assigned the certificate to automatically renew the certificate, so it becomes seamless for you. You do auto enrollment, allowing the certificate to automatically be deployed, and as it reaches a point where it needs to be renewed, it's automatically renewed. Configuring and managing key archival and recovery. Because certificates are the keys to the kingdom, you don't want to lose those keys. It'd be like losing the key to your house. So therefore, you have to provide what's called key archival and have recovery when needed. To recover a set of lost keys, you use a key archival and a recovery agent. You can do this through an automatic or manual key archival and key recovery methods to ensure that you can gain access to data in the event that those keys are lost. Understand that when restoring a key, it does not provide data recovery. The restored key provides the ability to read a restored file, but you're going to need to use another mechanism to actually back up the encrypted data. So this is just dealing with the key. If you lose the encrypted data, that's not going to be recovered by restoring a key. Okay, so understand that the .pfx file, it's the certificate file, and it contains the public and private keys. So it can be copied to whatever computer the user is using, and the certificate can be imported for the user. This may be a test question, so understand the .pfx file, it's the certificate file that contains the public and private keys. In this lesson, we identified what a digital certificate is, what all is contained within a digital certificate, and we looked at the certificate chain leading up to the root CA. How we use certificate templates to customize the use of a template for our organization. The benefits of auto-enrollment. And to use auto-enrollment, you have to have at least a version 2 certificate template. If we want to configure template permissions, we have to use a DACL, a discretionary access control list, for each one of those certificate templates. And we do this through the security tab on the template. When it comes to requesting a certificate, a user or computer can use manual enrollment, CA web enrollment, the enrollment agent, which is enrollment on behalf, or auto enrollment. We looked at each one of these various ways. Understand that for the most part within your domain, you're going to be using auto enrollment. It's much more efficient than trying to do these things manually. We discussed how the Network Device Enrollment Service, the NDES, is how we can distribute certificates to devices such as switches and routers. And that's critical if we want to be able to use 802.1x. We talked about the concept that every certificate has a validity period and a finite life. It can't be good for any longer than the validity period of its root CA. And as you reach the end of that validity period, that certificate needs to be renewed or it's no longer going to be accepted. When, if ever possible, always renew the certificate before it expires. In many cases, if your certificate expires, you'll have to issue a new certificate. And then finally, we just discussed how to recover private keys, and that to do so, you need to have an archival mechanism and then a recovery. Understand that simply recovering a set of keys may not recover the data. If the encrypted data was lost, recovering the keys does not recover the data. This has been Lesson 12 in 70-742. Thank you.